Hello, this is a tier list for mercenaries for a mage team. I'll be going in brief detail on why each mercenary is in their location, but overall the purpose of this video is to show new players which mercenaries to build if they're building a mage team. In this video, I won't be explaining how the tier list works because I explained that in the part 1 introduction of this mini-series. If you want to understand how the tier list works, go refer to that video. So starting us off in the S tier, we have Indra and AoG Eda. And Indra and AoG Eda, this team composition is for mage teams that want to be on the more defensive side. This is because of the main supporter of this team, which is Indra. And what he does is that he essentially turns a mage into a warrior, as long as you have 2 mages that charge beforehand. And not only that, Indra also provides a pretty good immortality buff to your entire team, a pretty decent offensive buff to your entire team as well, and a debuff on the entire enemy team. And if the debuff is removed, it will not only burn them, it will also set their attack type to front, which can fuck up the enemy every now and then. And yeah, you would also want to run AoG Eda on that if you're running Indra, because AoG Eda is quite tanky by herself, in addition to her valuable bless buff that she provides. So if you want to run a more defensive mage team comp, you could run Indra and AoG Eda, some other defenders and some mages. And with those defenders, you're able to tank and stall the enemy quite a lot, so that your mages could keep attacking. So next on the tier list is Noble Sacrifice Eda and Michaela, and this is for a mage team composition that you want to be more aggressive with. This is because Noble Sacrifice Eda, when she dies, she'll cause all of your mages on your team to be instantly charged. So let's say you're running 4 mages, you would have Michaela intentionally kill off your Noble Sacrifice Eda, and then stall out another turn with Refi, and then all 4 of your mages will be instantly charged. And that's why these two supports are really good together, so that you could intentionally sacrifice your Noble Sacrifice Eda and just have all your mages charged up and just attack right away. This is really good if you want to have a pretty aggressive team, but you do have to run a couple more mages, like 3 to 4 mages, which leaves you quite vulnerable defensively. Next is Velfern, and this is okay, no more of the team compositions. Now it's just the mercenaries themselves, I think, hopefully, but like, yeah, this is just Velfern. Velfern is pretty strong mage. I'd say he is the strongest mage, but there are a bunch of other like strong mages, but he is quite strong due to his very good tiles, his very good damage that he doesn't need to be buffed to still hit very hard, and his utility of having a horror stigma. His horror stigma is like nice to have, and it could sometimes like fuck up the enemy every now and then, but it's just nice to have. But other than that, Velfern still is just good overall. His tiles are amazing and his damage is amazing, and that's really it. Next is Frella, and Frella, the reason why I didn't put any like specific skill up here like how I did with the other mythics is that Frella, really the only one you want to run, or really the only skill set that you want to run on her, is Provisional HP, Energy Guard, I think that's what it's called, and the Fixed Damage DOT, Blade Rain. Those 3 skills, combined with her first skill obviously, it makes her really, really strong, because she could get a ton of Provisional HP, have a guard, and also have her Stigma, or like her first skill, which is her Stigma, to reflect damage back. And that's really annoying because that makes her quite difficult to take down. Combined with her fixed damage, DOT, that makes her not only quite strong defensively, but also decently strong offensively. So if you want to run an Indra team, I highly recommend getting a Frella, because she could tank a decent amount of attacks or shrug off like attacks quite often. So next is Lucius. And the thing with Lucius is that if you watch my previous video, he is in the S tier for pretty much the warrior team, the mage team, and the hybrid team. This is because Lucius is just very, very versatile, in addition to him being a pretty good tank. He is countered by heal ban, but even if the enemy uses like the maiden spell card on him, or let's say an Agni attacking him, that's still like either a valuable spell card or a warrior's turn wasted attacking him. He is countered pretty heavily by Diane, but other than that specific matchup, he's just really, really good to have if you want to stall out the enemy turns. Next is Enma, and Enma's really, really good sometimes. He is only not good when attacking defenders, but other than that, Enma is a force to be reckoned with because of his very unique ability, Class Attack. Class Attack, what it is, if you do not know, is that he will, after his first attack, he will attack a majority of the enemy's class type again. So let's say there are 5 warriors and 4 supporters. Enma will do his first attack, just do his first attack, and then he'll do a second attack. And since I said there are 5 warriors and 4 supporters, 5 warriors, that's the greatest number of class that the enemy has, because 5, is greater than 4. And because the enemy has 5 warriors, Enma will attack every single one of those warriors, each of them one time with his AoE as well, that X-tile AoE. So 5 warriors, every single one of those 5 is getting attacked, which is very deadly, especially since warriors and sometimes mages can be quite fragile. So he just, kaboom, just kills all of them some of the time. The only problem with Enma is that he's quite reliant on a penetration rune, which means he does have to be quite heavily buffed to hit quite hard with his penetration rune. But other than that, he is very, very scary to deal with if he hits like warriors or mages. Next up is A tier, and A tier we have Claudia. Now the thing with Claudia, she is very, very, very tanky for a mage. She doesn't really do much offensively other than apply a charm stigma on her main target, which can be annoying and can mess up the enemy sometimes, but it's more of a cheesy thing to happen. But her main unique part is that she has a guard and HP restraint. That combo is very, very deadly, especially since she needs to be hit 6 times. 6 is a goddamn lot of times, but that's why she's at the top of A tier, because she's a really, really tanky mage. Next is Anubis, and Anubis is quite similar to Velfern in that he's pretty much good because of his good tiles, like very good tiles, and pretty good damage as well. And that's really it. Anubis does have a stun in his horror stigma, but other than that, he just has good tiles and does good damage, and that's really all he needs, and that's why he's in the A tier. Next is Lain. And Lain is quite good for a mage team because of his stalling potential. Even though he's not like the greatest at roadblock tanking, the fact that he could revive just straight up makes him just good. Because he could revive. Which is good for mage teams such as in like Indra teams, because Indra teams want to be more defensively. So if you have Lain be a good roadblock tank, especially since he also highly counters Isleok, which is very commonly run in warrior teams, Lain is just really good to run. He's just very good at tanking, and he could be annoying to deal with sometimes. So next up is Venus, and Venus is actually really good on a mage team, because unlike her in a warrior team, her main problem in a warrior team is that she sets a warrior's tiles to 1 before they take that additional turn. If you have an uncharged mage on your team, if Venus buffs that uncharged mage, that mage will spend that additional turn charging, and then on their actual turn, they'll fire with the full AoE. So Venus's problem in setting the tiles to 1 when giving that additional turn is completely gone with mages. So technically you can have a mage opening that is 2 turns, which is kind of risky, but it can work. The main problem with Venus though on a mage team is that your team needs to be sufficiently buffed, because Venus does have a unique downside of reducing the stats of an ally when they take that additional turn. So they either have to be decently buffed or don't rely on buffs that much, such as Velfern. And other than that, you still have to make sure that you are careful of her other downside, which is after the ally takes the additional turn, they'll take a shit ton of direct damage that ignores provisional HP. So you can't really do this with like Frella or Velfern, but you can do this with like Enma, for example. But then again, this issue is completely remedied if you run Indra, because Indra for some reason has an immortality that he provides to all allies. Next up is Wester, and Wester is a bit of a weird case, but I still think he's actually quite strong. Wester himself is like decently tanky. He's not as tanky as Claudia, but what he is going for is that he does summon a Black Knight. This is the unique mechanic that he has. And once he summons a Black Knight, that Black Knight hits actually quite hard and has pretty decent tiles. The main problem with the Black Knight is that it's decently squishy. It can die to high-powered attackers such as Isleok or Alec. And the thing with Wester, he actually doesn't do damage at all. He pretty much only applies a dot and incoming damage boost, I guess. But that's really all he does. But overall, the Black Knight that he summons is still like not bad. It's still like threatening. So I still say he's still an A tier. Next is ESV Isleok, and yes, I put a warrior this high up because ESV Isleok is really, really good on mage teams if you manage to get a bunch of graves. For example, if you run a Noble Sacrifice Eda team and just kill like 5 enemies, ESV Isleok just instantly gets 5 turns. ESV Isleok also just doesn't need to be buffed at all because he buffs himself, so he could still do a crap ton of damage without many buffs, and that's why he's still pretty good to put on a mage team. I wouldn't put him on a mage team like above like other mages. There's still, you could definitely replace him with other mages, but still he's like not bad to run on a mage team. Next is Refi, and Refi is kind of like a so-so pick for an Indra team, but is a must-have for a Eda team. Or sorry, a Noble Sacrifice Eda team. This is because in a Noble Sacrifice Eda team, when Michaela applies her buff to an ally, it will also count as a debuff because it will consume their HP. Refi can see that's a debuff and give provisional HP to allies affected by the debuff that Michaela provides. So you essentially get free provisional HP if you run Refi in a Michaela team, and you get like a decent, offense buff and that immortality countering feature that she has if you put her on an Indra team. But overall, she's just like quite okay. Though she is a must-have for a Noble Sacrifice Eda team. And next up is Nartas. And Nartas actually has really good damage and pretty decent tiles because he hits an entire row. But the problem with Nartas is that he is very, very gambly. It's like you're playing the lottery with him. If you manage to put a Nartas matched up against an entire lane of like warriors or squishies, he just absolutely destroys that lane more effectively than any other mage. But if you again put Nartas matched up against, let's say, a AoG Eda or a Lucius, he's not going to do anything. He will just keep hitting that tank over and over again. So he is very good. I do say he is very good, but very, very like unreliable and inconsistent. That's why he's not an S tier, or barely hanging on to A tier. So next is B tier, and starting us off we have Veronia. And the thing with Veronia is that she's pretty good on a mage team, even though she's kind of not necessary in my opinion. Veronia, I do see Veronia used quite a lot in when you want Veronia to buff an Enma, because if you have Veronia buffing an Enma, Enma will hit very, very hard with his pen rune. But other than that, in an Indra team, she's kind of like okay, because she gives an ally like really strong offensive buffs, or even in a Michaela Eda Noble Sacrifice team, she does also make an ally hit even harder. But she isn't too necessary because mages themselves already hit like quite hard, and it's like decent enough that they're able to kill most things. So in a mage team, she's more of a niche pick, but still if you want to run her, that's totally fine as well. And next up is Granhildr, and Granhildr is actually not bad to put on a mage team because taunt tanks on a mage team is actually pretty good. Granhildr is also really good for her debuff reflection in her ability to counter Agni, Frella, and a bunch of other matchups. She's quite good in those matchups. In addition, if you give her quite a lot of health, such as like 70k or 80k HP, she could actually tank decently well. But overall, that's pretty much all she is. She is just a pretty decent tank with her ability to reflect quite a lot of debuffs in the game. And yeah, next up is Sier. Sier is decently similar role to Granhildr due to the fact that she is also a taunt tank, and taunt tanks are not bad to put on a mage team. Though Sier is a bit weaker in my opinion because she doesn't have that very valuable debuff reflection, but she does have a death stigma that she could apply that sometimes kills the enemy, but she also has that survival instinct which cuts the damage she receives, so she could sometimes be more tanky than Granhildr, but in my opinion I would personally run Granhildr more. Next up is Asmode, and Asmode is not bad to run on a mage team due to mages inherently being slow. Due to the fact that Asmode could just straight up just give you free damage, is just quite good to have. He is countered by enemies having immortality, but this can be remedied if you have him buffed by a Venus. But other than that, his heal ban is quite valuable to have as well for certain matchups, and just straight up the free damage he provides can be valuable for mages. Next up is Haruna, and Haruna is like not bad or a bit of a weird pick to put on mage teams. She is kind of similar to Frella in the fact that she gets a lot of provisional HP and has a pretty strong single target attack, but her main problem is that she is like not as tanky as Frella. She is quite nice and quite niche to run on an Indra team, because if you run her on an Indra team, you have to run 2 mages instead of 3 mages, because Haruna's main gimmick is that she could auto charge herself so that Indra actually gains 2 charges from 1 mage, which allows you to run that 1 less mage. But other than that, she's like kind of like mid pick, but I wouldn't like hound you for picking her. She's still a fine pick. Next is Agni and Lakshmi, and these two function quite similarly to ESV Isleok. they both have HP scaling direct damage attacks, so they don't really need to be buffed that high to deal damage, and their attacks are also quite devastating. Agni's HP consume and her direct damage is quite strong, and Lakshmi's HP consume and direct damage is also quite strong. So these two warriors together are not bad if you want to run them on a mage team, but honestly they are still replaceable by, regular mages. But still, if you run these two warriors, if you want to just have a constant stream of damage just like Asmode, it's still like not a bad pick. So next up is RoTK Isleok, or Return of the King Isleok, and RoTK Isleok does have the benefit of still doing damage as a roadblock tank while, roadblock tanking. He is super hyper countered by Lain, so that's the only bad matchup he has, and in my opinion, there are better roadblock tanks to run on a mage team, such as Frella, Lucius, AoG Eda, or even Claudia, and even Wester at sometimes. So picking RoTK Isleok's kind of like whatever. So next up is Kubera. Kubera is kind of in the same position as Nartas, in which she is quite inconsistent and quite gambly. But if you do hit the lottery with her, she is quite good. She hits multiple times and does have heal ban, which allows her to kill tanks quite well, but her damage is kind of like mediocre, and if she gets matched up against hitting a single enemy, she kind of doesn't do too much. Her small AoE tiles is really what's holding her back, but she is not like terrible. So next up is Celia, and the main benefit of running Celia is that automatic minus 25% stats to all enemies, in addition to her Silent Stigma. Her Silent Stigma is actually quite deadly and can shut down quite a few warriors and even some mages, but is kind of unreliable because sometimes those warriors or mages or even defenders and sometimes supporters can even be debuff immune. So at that point, she is just not good to run. So she has very bad matchups, but at the same time, if she hits like the golden spot, with her 5x5 tile, she can like devastate the enemy with her Silent Stigma. So next up is Zenith, and the main benefit of running Zenith is her concentrated fire counter, because if an enemy hits Zenith, and that enemy is like deep within the enemy lines, since mages have such a great AoE tiles, the enemy is just going to completely get wiped due to the fact that the mage now can hit deep into the enemy lines through that concentrated fire. But other than that, Zenith is quite a weak taunt tank, and she's just like okay to run on a mid team. Like, I'd honestly prefer to run a more stable tank such as Granhildr, or even roadblock tanks such as Lucius or AoG Eda. But she's not bad if you want to fuck around with concentrated fire. Next is Benshina, and Benshina is slightly worse as a taunt tank in a mage team because you already have Granhildr and Sier, but her main benefit is just being really tanky once an enemy dies. The problem with Benshina though, that taunt and her tankiness activates when an enemy dies. Mages are inherently slow, so it's hard for Benshina to keep proccing that tankiness and taunt that she gets. But overall, she's like not terrible to run. So next up is Sura, and Sura is actually not bad on a mage team because he functions similarly to ESV Isleok, Agni, Lakshmi, and Asmode, because if you want to have that one mercenary that is constantly attacking the enemy. Sura actually has pretty good tiles and pretty decent damage, so he can fulfill that role, but he does have the same inconsistency problem as Nartas and Kubera, as in if he isn't matched up in a bad lane, then he pretty much does nothing the entire fight. But if he's matched up in a good lane, then he does have a pretty strong impact. So next is the niche tier, and starting us off in the niche tier we have Valtor, and Valtor is quite niche to run on a mage team because he's quite good against warrior teams because of his ability to have that nullify counter to remove the warrior's critical buffs, such as Mary White's or Mary's buffs. But other than that, he is a okay roadblock tank, and the main problem with Valtor and the reason why I put him in niche tier is that he doesn't do any damage. So next up is Lilian, and Lilian is kind of similar to Frella in which all of the defensive buffs Lilian receives, but the problem with Lilian is that she is a roadblock tank that for her to do damage, she must get hit. And her ability to be must get hit is quite inconsistent sometimes, because what if the enemy doesn't hit her, what if the enemies skip, or what if the enemy is a back attacker, she won't get hit, and therefore she won't do damage. Overall, I'd just rather run Frella than Lilian. So next up is Walya, and Walya is kind of the weird case where she's good in an Indra team but kind of bad in a Michaela team. This is because in a Michaela team, you want to spread out your mercenaries or your mages quite well due to the fact that each of the mage you want to utilize their AoE and have a chance to just completely blow up the enemy. And due to the fact that they're spread out, Walya kind of has a hard time buffing them. While in an Indra team, he doesn't really care about positioning, so you could create a line formation where Walya can buff all of them and turn them untargetable. Honestly, in my opinion, I would just replace Walya with another mage so that I have more firepower, but she's like not a bad pick in my opinion. Next up is Cecilia and Ledakrad combo. This is the combo where you have 2 AoE absorbers on your team, and this team is quite good in which it reduces like quite literally the AoE of the team quite a lot. But you do have to kind of make a line formation with these two. And the other problem that is this team is quite heavily countered by Anastasia. So you have 2 kind of okay roadblock tanks, and Ledakrad is an okay taunt tank. But other than that, this is kind of like unreliable to happen in or work in arena. Next is Lincross, and Lincross is kind of not necessary to run on any mage team. You can run him for his ability to clean up the team or the enemy team very well, but other than that, he sucks against provisional HP, which is super common nowadays, and other mages can just clean up just as well, such as Velfern. He could just go again and blow up all the enemies, and really, Lincross isn't really that necessary, but I wouldn't flame you for running him due to the fact that he's number 1 really cool, and number 2 his ability to attack all the graves, allowing to finish off enemies that don't have provisional HP. So next up is Albion, and Albion's kind of the strange case, similar to Walya. This is because he's quite good in a Michaela team but quite bad on an Indra team. This is because in an Indra team you have quite a lot of time allowing your mages to charge up, and since a charging mage passes their turn, they could easily pass their turn to a taunter that could just straight up activate their taunt. But Albion is quite good on a Michaela team because in a Michaela team you are spending so much time allowing your already charged mages to keep on casting, so you don't have time to have your taunters taunt. So Albion applying taunt on your roadblock tanks such as Lucius can be a good idea. Next up is Glacia, and Glacia is kind of a weird pick because she's a mixture of a roadblock tank and a taunt tank. She can survive a single hit from an enemy, but she is countered by Agni, which is super meta right now. So I'd rather just run Granhildr, which counters meta mercenaries more. So next up is Helga, and I put Helga this far down on the niche tier because she's a bit hard to use when attacking. Because if you want to utilize Helga's buffs and debuffs right away, you have to have her sacrificed by El Clear, which is an event mercenary. But having her sacrifice gives the enemy buff ban, which is very good against warriors or mages or just any team in general because it prevents them from getting their critical buffs. But overall, a bit hard to pull off and quite resource intensive to pull off because if you want to run El Clear and Helga to intentionally sacrifice Helga, then that's just 2 mercenary slots instantly used. So next is the outclass tier, and starting us off we have Ymir, and Ymir is actually not a bad roadblock tank still, but he is still outclassed by AoG Eda and Lucius due to the fact that he could still be blown up by HP consumed damage and mercenaries such as ESV Isleok. So next up is Kali, and Kali is not a bad taunt tank to put on a team, however she is outclassed by Granhildr if you want a taunt tank, and Kali is honestly replaceable as Lucius or AoG Eda as like a better roadblock tank. And next up is Manua, and some may argue that she has very good damage, very good tiles, and the ability to go twice, but the fact that she has very weird type coverage, which is guard barrier ignore, in addition to being incredibly squishy, she is put in the outclass tier because of that. Because you have Velfern, who has a very high damage restraint when he's attacking, and then you have Frella, who has a bunch of provisional HP, Enma has HP restraint, Claudia has HP restraint, Anubis has provisional HP when he attacks. Manua literally has nothing. So next up is Beliath and Eindolin, and these two I'm grouping together because they pretty much function the same thing in providing an immortality buff to your entire team. However, Indra already does that, so their use is kinda not necessary, especially since immortality buffs do not stack. Beliath does provide skeletons, which is the nice utility that she could provide, but other than that, they're both kind of very outclassed by Indra. So next is the don't build tier, and yes, there are these many mercenaries in the don't build tier. So starting us off, we have Babariba, and Babariba's main problem is that her damage typing is really bad, especially since she can't ignore defense, which is super common in today's meta, especially since AoG Eda can provide the bless buff, which can give allies 100% defense, and also just mercenaries having 100% defense naturally. So next up is Sola, and so Sola is pretty much a worse version of Indra. Sola, if you want to run Sola at all, just run Indra. Her aura is a mid, while Indra also provides an aura, while having all the other things you can do. So next up is Celion, and Celion shares the same inconsistency as Nartas and Kubera in which you have to hit the lottery. However, even if you hit the lottery with Celion, it's still very underwhelming. Even though she does direct damage to everyone vertically and horizontally connected together, if they have an immortality buff, they'll live. And her dealing that additional barrier ignore damage to ignore that immortality survival is quite bad, especially since it's barrier ignore. A lot of enemies does have 100% defense, kind of like the similar problem to Babariba. Next up is Levia, and Levia's main problem is that she struggles super hard against provisional HP, which is extremely common nowadays. Yeah, her main attack does ignore provisional HP and hits twice, but she still has that main problem. She can't break through provisional HP. She also sucks very hard against HP restraint. Next is Galania, and Galania in summary is a worse version of Beliath and Eindolin, and those two are a worse version of Indra. So next up is Bathdori, and Bathdori's main problem is that she kinda has to charge up and take that long time charging up for her to deal damage at all. This is because her skill has incredibly low scaling, and she has to rely on the crit damage she gains from one of her skills to gain or to do damage at all. But her main problem is her very small 3x3 AoE tiles. Next is Lumen, and in short, Lumen's just a worse version of Nartas. So next up is Eldora, and the main problem with Eldora is that she does guard barrier ignoring damage, which is again similar problem to Celia and Babariba. Just so many enemies have 100% defense that this is just really easy to ignore. In addition to her unique ability to attack the back tiles, that part is really good. However, she can be taunted away very easily, which is really bad. So next up is Muse, and she actually does quite a good amount of damage. However, that doesn't save her from the fact that she has horrible tiles. So next up is Catherine, and Catherine can do good damage, and she does have good AoE tiles. However, it's super unreliable because she consumes her HP when attacking, so she has to kill the enemy, and that's quite unreliable. Other than that, she doesn't do much else for the team. So next up is Frisia, and her main problem is damage. She is lacking damage because, surprise, she does barrier guard ignoring damage. Are you seeing the pattern here? In addition to her revive mechanic being so gimmicky. So next up is Elise, and Elise is really bad due to enemies being debuff immune. That's it. If an enemy is debuff immune, she doesn't do anything. Elise herself actually doesn't do any damage at all, and Elise is just super cheesy, and that's it. She is incredibly inconsistent. And next is Nura, and Nura is just straight up outdated. And yeah, that's a tier list. However, I should mention again that this tier list is only for a mage team and only for the regular arena. This isn't for World Arena, this isn't for Guild War, this isn't for Mystic Island, because those tier lists would be very different. Again, this is very specifically for a mage team composition for the arena format. And that's it. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching.